Open the others.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm so sorry, and I'm so sorry. We literally had to reset all of them. I think they're all restarting now. Keegan's on the phone with me.
Sorry about this.
The other one's opening?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Jai. We had to.
Okay.
Hopefully they'll all come back. There was an issue.
Okay.
So
I made you host. So if you want to let anybody in the waiting room.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. If someone's watching the recording later, we're just getting resettled, so no worries. You didn't miss anything. Let me, do I need to make you co-host again? Let me see. No worries, you're great. Can everyone still see the ethics and career counseling slide? Awesome, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay, all right. If we need another breath to recenter ourselves, feel free to take that deep breath. And let's jump back in. I know some people are still rejoining, but luckily the slides are pretty text heavy, so it'll be easy for them to catch up. In addition to advocacy, there's also the idea of confidentiality in advocacy. So that goes back to not imposing your values, right? It's important for us to obtain consent prior to engaging in advocacy on behalf of a particular client, right? And if we're using a client story in our advocacy, we want to protect anonymity. And so I just bring these things up because a lot of this work happens in the individual meetings. And at the same time, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, within the ACA competency domains, the individual student, client, and relationship is only 1/3 of advocacy. There's also community, school, and organizational level and the public arena, right? So that can be all this. And those of you who went to Jane's session earlier today, she actually showed this chart as well. And I love that because I think it is really important to recenter on the fact that it's not just about the work we do with the client, and not to say that that's not good enough, because there's enough in society telling that we're not doing enough, it's not good enough, but just to say there's that invitation, there's that opportunity for us to engage on the community levels and on the public arena levels as well. All right, so I'm going to move ahead just for the sake of time, but this is really the crux of what I wanted to have a conversation with everybody here today, is about the ideal versus the reality of the work that we do. So the ideal, let's pull from the National Career Development Association's vision, which is for all people to attain fulfilling life and career goals. And that is the work we do. Absolutely. I think the hard part is realizing that our work tends to exist on the individual client to student basis, or client to counselor or student to counselor basis, when in reality, a lot of the barriers to fulfilling life and career goals are systemic and are these oppressive systems. And so I wanted to kind of talk about each of these four, look at our complicity in each of these four systems, like do a little bit of a critical examination, and then kind of look at what we can be doing differently, what we can continue to do, because a lot of you probably by being drawn to this title, you might already be doing some of this work. But first we have to talk about what are these oppressive systems. So specifically, I'm going to be talking about income inequality, educational systems, non-decent work, and professional culture. Larger systems within these exist, such as capitalism and racism, and we can talk about those. But I wanted to talk about these four specifically as they pertain to career counseling. So you can see a little more detail here. With income inequality, what I'm specifically talking about is the fact that a lot of our conversations with students and clients tend to be around, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? What do you want to go towards? And oftentimes money is taboo or is something that they feel selfish or materialistic for bringing up. When in reality, there is a pervasive income inequality between many disciplines and industries and within many disciplines and industries. And talking about it is the least we can do, right? I'm sure many of you already talk about it. But in addition, I specifically want to talk about social impact work and how it's stereotyped and often is low wage work. including career counseling and career development. So we'll be having some real talk there as well. And no worries, Ashley, I saw you in the chat. I'm going to put the link to the slides again, because absolutely, it's hard to stay caught up. And yeah, everybody got kicked out, but we're back in. So thank you all for being flexible. We're demonstrating our resilient skills here. So continuing on ahead, social impact work we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about educational systems. So I work for a community college, and something I see students fall prey to, unfortunately, is an oversimplified and misleading narrative around higher education and social mobility. Is it true that higher education is a huge factor and a huge producer of social mobility? Absolutely. But is that narrative sometimes oversimplified and misleading? Absolutely, in my opinion. And then we'll talk in my experience as well. We'll talk about non-decent work, and then we'll talk about professional culture. But I'm going to have a slide for each of these. So let's go into depth a little bit more. So income inequality, this is the CCDA conference. So I do want to talk just California for you all. In the most recent available data, which is from 2022, in California, families at the top of the income distribution, the 90th percentile, earned 10 times more than families at the 10th percentile. So 305,000 annually versus 29,000 annually. And only 7 other states have wider income gaps than we do in California. And so I just think looking at that reality is part of this. And then you can kind of see over on the right-hand side, this is very disproportionate based on folks' ethnicity and their ethnic background, their ancestry, and the systemic racism that they experience. So the current gap reflects a 59% income growth for the 90th percentile, so it's growing. And the 10th percentile is only growing 13%. So we're seeing it kind of continue to separate, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. We've kind of heard that phrase. In 1980, the top income distribution was 7 times more than those at the bottom, right? And so we've already increased that gap from 7 times to even more. And I just think it's worth recognizing that our students are feeling the squeeze, and that we might be feeling the squeeze, and probably are. And so one of the first things with this is just having this knowledge and having this data and making sure it doesn't feel unnormalized to bring it up, right? Because if a student kind of talks about this experience, the myth of meritocracy in American culture is to say, oh, but you can pursue education, you can climb out of your circumstances, you can make this work. But it's hard to have that reality sit next to this chart on the right-hand side of the screen, right? Where we see this huge, so this is our Latino population, is this light blue, is hugely overrepresented in the bottom 10% and the bottom 11 to 20%. We can see our Black population, which is this purple color, is the biggest representation is in the bottom 10% of income earners. And this is not even talking about wealth and generational wealth. This is just talking about income from work. So we see the evidence, we see the outcomes of oppression. We're going to talk about it more, but I'm going to move on to the next one just because this is just setting the scene for y'all. The next thing is social impact work. A lot of students, particularly that I work with, that see the wealth disparities and the income disparities impacting their community, want to give back, right? If I make it out of this system through education, I don't just want to leave my community behind, right? But at the same time, I'm including some research here that shows that pay suppression tends to happen and hit social impact work because we love it. It's important. We do it out of the goodness of our heart. And there's a lot of history here from charity and volunteer work run by white women that they did while their income was supplanted by, a cis straight white man who was in relationship with them. There's a lot of history of why this stuff is the way it is. We don't have time to cover all of that in this session, so I'm just alluding to it. But in terms of IO psychologists, who are kind of similar counterparts to career counselors, they've done some research and they actually showed that we had a workshop today on salary negotiation. Salary negotiation is typically undermined within social impact work because if you try to negotiate, they say, well, don't you care about this work? We want someone to work for our company who cares about helping this community. If you're here for the money, are you really there to help them? Right. And so it's kind of, we're kind of put in this between a rock and a hard spot. And so I just want to kind of show how this actually looks in the numbers. Again, just using data to set the scene. The mean wage in California in 2023 was $76,000. That includes everybody, every level of education, all of the labor market, Now let's look at some of these human impact, social impact work. Social and human services assistants were well below that at 41,000 annually. Community and social service specialists were 49,000 annually. Social workers, which typically require a master's degree, were still underneath the mean wage, including those with PhD to a high school diploma at 53,000. Here's us, educational, career, guidance, counselors, and advisors. The annual mean is 61,000. So still over 10,000 below the mean wage of workers in California, despite our profession having a master's degree as the main typical entry-level education. Even a socially good job that's in STEM, right? Conservation scientist, STEM, it pays well, you hear that. It's still below the mean. And then I just want to compare that. The one time we get above the mean is when we get community and social service managers. But if you compare them to general and operations managers, they're severely underpaid for being a manager. And so we probably already know this from our own experiences and seeing our students and clients out in the workforce, but I do just want to kind of show these wages and really look at this. And it brings us to a conundrum as career counselors, right? So if we want to help our students and clients move up in the world, do we discourage them from these types of jobs because they pay lower, right? No, obviously there's no right or wrong answer, but we have to navigate the reality of this wage deflation, right? All right, sorry, I know I'm going really fast on setting the scene and I'm not painting a happy picture, but that's what we're here to talk about. So I work within the educational system. Let me go ahead and kind of own that I have such a love-hate relationship with it because it's so powerful. I love learning, I love education. And yet, here's where we're at. 52% of college graduates are underemployed a year after graduation. So over half of them are employed in a field of work that does not require their college degree. And after 10 years, it's still dangerously close to half of our graduates. 45% of graduates are underemployed 10 years after graduation. So they worked so hard to get that college education. And not to say it's not benefiting their life, but they're not seeing their return on the investment. And when you look at it, it tends to be the students who worked the hardest and overcame the most barriers. Our first generation college students, our college students of color, our queer students, our immigrant students. They tend to be the ones that are still underemployed, even though they were told often by society and by their families, go to education, that's how you'll get a better life, right? And so that's what I mean when I say it's a misleading narrative. We're not lying to these students, but we're also not painting the full picture, at least in my experience. And so all that being said, this is California State Auditor's report over on the right-hand side. And it shows for community colleges in particular, right? And I love that I work at a community college. I love that it's open access and we accept the top 100% of students. And we're failing them, you know, we really, and some of them, right, leave for their own reasons. And there's lots of things painting the data, but this audit shows how many students intended to transfer and get a bachelor's level degree. Less than 30% had successfully transferred in 6 years to even start at the university. And maybe we should be using a different timeline than 6 years, but also, again, you can see the disproportionate impacts of that, right? If it takes this long to do my education, how am I going to get that return on investment? And then last, but not least, I'm sorry, there's two more. Oh, my. Non-decent work. So this is all the types of ways that the working world maybe doesn't provide the basic needs of what the Industrial Labor Organization has called decent work. I've heard this spoken about earlier today. Dr. Balin spoke about it during her session, but it's basically work that is productive and delivers a fair income, provides security and social protection, has better prospects for both personal development and social integration, and then freedom for people to organize, express their concerns, participate in decisions that impact the workplace. And so it's basically this bare minimum from the Industrial Labor Organization to say, this is the bare minimum that working professionals should receive. And I bet we can think of people and loved ones or people that we know of that are working in jobs that don't provide this, right? And then another really common phenomenon is this idea of hope labor, which is or undercompensated work carried out in the present, often for experience or exposure, in the hope that future employment opportunities may follow, right? We do this to a lot of our students. Unpaid internships are the perfect example of hope labor. And then there's also precarious work. In the community college system where I work, this is all of our adjunct part-timers who are hired on a semester basis and not given that basic stability of understanding whether or not they can expect employment in the future. So it's work that is unstable and insecure in the continuity and quantity of work, restricts the power of workers to advocate for change, and does not provide protections from workplace abuses and unsafe working conditions. All right. So this is a spectrum, right? My part-time workers at the community college, I hope they're not facing clearly unsafe working conditions, but we could talk about psychological safety and how they might be impacted by the precarity of the experience of being a part-timer. And then last but not least, exploitive work and unpaid domestic labor. So exploitive work is things like wage theft and classifying workers as independent contractors just to deny them full-time benefits when in reality they are a full-time worker. And then also unpaid domestic labor. So all of the labor that's traditionally done in the household by women, but also traditionally overrepresented by women of color, and all the kind of things that happen in the household to get things going, child raising, taking care of chores, all sorts of things like that. Okay, and then professional culture, right? One of my biggest challenges in being a career counselor is helping people move through our educational system into our workforce and knowing that our workforce is currently very flawed and seeped in a lot of systems of oppression. So it's rooted in white supremacy and oppression. We know this. Again, I don't have time to go into all the history, but I can give you resources if this is the first time you're hearing that. Probably not. But there's a lot of expectations of assimilation, right? A lot of historical career coaching and career counseling has been, and for some people continues to be, this is how you change yourself to fit into the work environment, right? You like to wear your hair natural, you like to wear traditional garb, you present as a certain gender, and yet you wear clothes that are defying the norms of clothing for that gender. All of those things are unprofessional, right? The other thing about the world of work, it is so individualistic and it is so hierarchical, right? And a lot of folks don't thrive in those environments, right? Whether they come from more collectivist cultures, whether they want more of that community orientation rather than a top-down approach. There's just a lot of that in professional culture, and the expectation historically has been, this is how it works, so you change yourself, right? There's a couple of quotes here that I just want to name. And there's also been studies on bias in hiring. So of course, even getting that job, getting to the hiring, we've seen people disproportionately impacted based on, again, ethnicity, gender, age, you name it. But let me read this quote from a 2021 NCDA presentation that has stuck with me. These folks from the Georgetown University Career Education Center said, professional norms around resumes, interviewing, and dress code and appearance have an expectation of code switching, assimilation, or even identity erasure when the individual navigating these norms is not accounted for in them, right? And then also a blog that was written by an Ohio State University professional said, comments about how to act professional serve to police the way I perform my gender, race, class, and other intersecting identities while simultaneously undermining my educational and professional qualifications and credentials as secondary to that performance, right? So sorry to start so bleak, but again, like these are the realities we live in, and I would rather talk about them than not talk about them. So before I move ahead, anything that I missed that anybody wants to share about these four dynamics of non-decent work, educational systems, income inequality, or professional culture? Okay, I just want to provide an opening. Feel free. There's going to be more guided participation, but I just wanted to pause for a moment. So now that we've set the scene, in my understanding and experience, and as well as what I see as successful research around this, we can't do effective deconstructing work of oppressive systems until we deconstruct them in ourselves, right? And that means also recognizing what systems we're still stuck within and beholden to. So it starts with understanding your own capacity and self-awareness. So this starts with just understanding, first of all, your positionality. So in what ways do I hold power? In what ways do I experience marginalization? Because we are all in that unique place where we're experiencing certain levels of marginalization and certain levels of oppression and certain levels of privilege, right? Even if you look at a global perspective, right? Being in the United States, despite our current administration, still involves a great amount of privilege and wealth compared to the global South, right? The other thing is our capacity, right? What am I willing to risk? What am I willing to lose? Some of us want to engage in this work, but we have families relying on us. We have people relying on us. So we say, I can't lose my job over this. I can't go protest in the streets over this. I can't serve a night in jail over this. And having those boundaries and knowing what your own capacity is one of the best ways to start. I learned this from my colleague, Dr. Brian Hutchison, and he did some activist work, and he always kind of reminds the people he works with is when you're doing activist work, you have to understand your own capacity. That way you're not misleading other people, and you can be clear on what you are and are not willing to contribute and willing to lose. So I just want to start with self-awareness and just ask ourselves, right? How much self-education have I done around the social issues I want to impact? So this means basics, trainings on power, privilege, and oppression. All of you here probably have received this just by way of being part of CCDA, because a lot of our work is based on diversity, equity, inclusion, and unpacking power and privilege and oppression. But have you looked at savior complex and white savior dynamics? Have you looked at cultural humility and the nuances of social justice work? And when I say the nuances, I mean really complex, contradictory nuances, such as looking at the indigenous community and realizing different tribes want different things. And so if you are wanting to fight for indigenous rights, how do you do that when some tribes are recognized federally, some are not, some want to be called one thing, some want to be called another thing, and knowing that there's no right or wrong answers. When I see people sometimes in the social justice space kind of craving this black and white, right and wrong, I understand it. It's a basic human impulse, but there's a lot of nuances and complexities and things that have some wrong and some right in them at the same time. So starting with self-awareness is realizing, how much have I sat in that discomfort? How much am I willing to live in this discomfort and not turn away from it and go to a more comfortable sense of right and wrong? And last but not least, these problems are facing people's lived experiences. And when we try to come into a community, let's say that you're not queer, but you're trying to help a client or a student who's queer, they are going to be the experts on what it's like to live the lived reality of a queer student, right? You can do all the PD in the world, but if you're not queer yourself, you're not going to know what that day-to-day existence is like. And so not only are they the experts at the day-to-day realities of it, they're also those problem are usually those closest to the solution, right? There was recently in our federal administration a talk about how to get women to have more children. And this talk was led mostly by men. And some of the things that came up were a one-time payment. And any woman who knows other women who are parents and not, all sorts of parents, it doesn't just have to be women, but I think it's important to note that there were no women in that space. And from my understanding, no gender nonconforming people either. And if you ask any woman, they would say a one-time payment is not going to be a real incentive for a lifelong commitment like having a child, right? So we probably know this. But all that being said, a lot of today, what we're doing is starting with the self. You might be really advanced in this stuff and already doing stuff, which is why I want us to talk to each other. But some of you, if the things that I've brought up, you're like, oh, this is a little bit new to me. That's okay, right? It literally starts anywhere on the spectrum. And so with our self-awareness, I think we should start with a critical analysis activity. And so I think I want to dedicate some time for us to think and maybe share, if we're feeling open and vulnerable and willing, maybe share in what ways am I upholding and or complicit in systems of oppression? Big question. I will be giving some examples, so you know what I mean. But I also think you can't ask that question without then asking, what is my capacity to resist, and how can I resist and deconstruct these systems of oppression? So the four that I'm naming that I want to talk about today are income inequality, educational systems, non-decent work, and professional culture. So I'm going to give a couple examples, and then I'm going to let you all think and chat with each other. But actually, let's talk with educational systems, right? Because in what ways am I upholding or complicit in systems of oppression? I am a full-time counselor at a California community college, and my salary is really different than my part-time workers because they're not able to access the same stability. Like the salary can be comparable, but in terms of the benefits and the retirement planning, it's totally different. And then compared to my colleagues who are career counselors and career coaches and career development professionals at the university, there can be a $30,000 pay difference. And so recognizing that I'm on the quote unquote other side of that as a full-timer, what am I doing to fight for my colleagues at the university? What am I doing to fight for my part-timers at my college? And there's been times where I'm at my limits, I'm at my capacity, and I feel it. I feel that I'm letting my colleagues down. And at the same time, it's a collective thing. We can't put this responsibility all on ourselves individually, but I think we do have to start with a critical analysis individually of like, where am I at? What have I contributed to? What have I not contributed to? What communities can I plug into? Because one of the ways of thinking that we just are so defaulting to in the US is individualistic thinking, right? Even the way I'm sharing my own experiences, I, me, my experience, right? I want us to kind of chat with each other and really plug into community here. But that's one example of like income inequality. And then in terms of educational systems, I already spoke about that, but it's wild to work at a community college where so many students say, I'm here because my parents sacrificed so much to get me an education because that's going to be my ticket to a better future. And then I see alumni who are underemployed, severely underemployed. And so just seeing the disparities of that and recognizing what am I doing to help or harm that? What ways am I complicit in that? Sometimes do I hide statistics from students so that I'm not discouraging them, right? When I work with child development majors, I try to make sure they know that a lot of the childcare worker jobs are poverty wages right now. If you want to be a manager or run a daycare, absolutely you can make a living wage. But what do you have those leadership interests, right? So are you talking about the data? Are you not talking about it? Sometimes we don't want to show data because we don't want to paint something as a bad major or a wrong choice or discourage the student or make them give up on college altogether. So it's a really fine line that we walk, but I just think it's worth examining. So I just want to pause for a second. Is anyone willing to share any reflections that come up when you think about this, either from your personal work or from your personal lived experience, or you can direct message it to me anonymously and I can share it without sharing, your name or anything. Anyone willing to share?
Well, we talk about, what is it? I'm in my third half of life right now, if that makes any sense, third half of life. So in my second half of life, I spent 27 years working for an organization. Now, income inequality. This particular organization was a civil service. It was civil service work, and there were pay scales associated with job titles. So whatever job title I had, I was getting paid the same amount that my peers were. Um, that being said, I mean, you can look at me and you can tell that I've had some advantages in a number of different ways. And I get that. I get that. But when it comes to the course of employment I was engaged in for 27 years, I don't have a lot of issues with income inequality pertaining to what I was doing. What I'm doing right now, the work that I'm doing with GS Consultants right now, and for the last 10 years, I make a point to make sure that people are being compensated. Those that are doing work for GS Consultants are being compensated in a responsible manner. To the point where there are people who work for me that make more than I do. Educational systems, well, I'll pause for a second, see if anybody else has anything to say on any of these.
I did see Eugenie's hand, so I want to give her a chance as well, but thank you for sharing that, P, and thank you for pausing to make space. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself that I have this, as a career counselor, I have this sort of bias toward jobs that make a difference, like the ones that you pointed out are lower paying, including my own. I'm a social worker, and I always recognize, that I had, that if I didn't have like the balance of my husband's income, being a social worker, I probably may not have been able to support myself as well as, I am, because I have a, two family income. But anyway, I guess what I want to say is that I do think I have this bias toward work that makes a difference, but a lot of times it is not paid as well. And so am I participating in encouraging people to do jobs that, And I think people sometimes, like you said, are more motivated to, like if they've had mental health concerns, they might be more motivated to work in mental health, or if they've, and in any case, that's one aspect I just want to say is, but I do feel like I have tried, I recognize that a lot of people cannot afford opportunities that are unpaid. And so I really tried to make available paid opportunities for young people so that because if you're lower income, you wouldn't have to work at McDonald's. Hopefully you could work in a career that's of interest to you, with a paid opportunity. Anyway, those are my comments.
No, those are wonderful. And I think you did a really good job of, I mean, both of you did, but speaking of this idea of we live in these systems while we're navigating them. So there's helping clients and students do it. And there's also our own, oh, I have a dual income. In some ways, I have the privilege to be able to do this work, but I'm getting paid lower. How is that a privilege? And I just want to name, like, that's the nuances of this stuff. And it's crunchy and it's hard. And when we think about something like social work, right? How do we raise wages for a field like that? And that's why I, maybe bring up unions too much, but that seems to be, one of the ways that works. And at the same time, it's not foolproof and it's not without its problems. But before I talk too much, I see Dawn's hand is up. So let Dawn go ahead.
Sure. So I was thinking, your question, what are ways I'm upholding or complicit in systems of oppression? And right now, for me, as I'm sure many of you feel, my greatest concern is for my non-citizen students. But if I'm honest with myself, right, I think I have to say I'm complicit by default, right? Because I need to think outside of the box. I need to be able to come up with solutions. Like, yes, this is the challenge, and we can acknowledge the barrier, we can acknowledge the reality, but I'm really making an effort to search out, because there are people that have found careers. So knowing where can I guide my students, right? But at the same time, being honest, right? Because I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. It really reminds me of one of my colleagues, Charette Garcia, who does a lot of work in the area of non-citizen students or undocumented students. She has an organization called Undocu Professionals. And I'm just shouting her out because it's a great organization. And because they recently made a post that was, if you're only talking with your non-citizen students or undocumented students about entrepreneurship, which is the main way, right? Because you can use an ITIN number and you don't need a work permit. If you're only talking about entrepreneurship, you're missing the mark, right? She said you also have to be talking about ways that we can push legislation forward so that there are pathways to citizenship and there are pathways to work permits, right? And so I think that was a really powerful post, and feel free to check it out on her LinkedIn, Charette Garcia. But I think it speaks to what you're talking about, Dawn, with thinking outside the box, but also being honest and saying, well, the reason so many of us are talking about entrepreneurship is because right now in this lived reality with this legal climate and this administration, that's one of the only ways to access income right now for that population. So it's a really complex and sticky topic. Absolutely. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And I also want to shout out what Jai said in the chat, which is super important. Jai says, these are very introspective questions. In addition to these questions, we also have to ask ourselves, when it comes to these types of conversations, what discomforts am I avoiding and why? Right? I think that's huge. And it's almost like that present looking at myself. How do I, when I raise my hand, what do I want to say? What do I not want to say? What am I leaving unsaid? So Jai, thank you so much for adding that. And I am keeping an eye on time. So we've got less than 10 minutes, which is wild, but I love the sharing already. I'm going to move ahead a little bit. I'm going to hand out a resource. This is something that's more about when you lead groups. So career development classes and workshops. I actually developed it for a presentation I'm doing with the NCDA, the National Career Development Association. But what I want to shout out about it is it has reflection questions that I developed in partnership with AI. And when I was writing about the deconstructive systems, you'll see it in the comments of the slideshow today. I almost talked about AI and the current technological landscape. Not to say that AI is like on its own oppressive, but just the oversaturated landscape with misinformation, disinformation, and bots that are passing for human and taking advantage of people. So anyway, I want to say that I used AI, but AI isn't perfect, but it also isn't a villain. And all that being said, one of the tools on this toolkit is reflection questions. And so it really does start with self-reflection. And I hate to hammer that home so much, but that's where I always recenter myself. And so the reflection questions, you can click on the table of contents. It has everything from, oh, it's not going to show, but recognizing and sharing power, to your relationships with students, to the content that you present or share with students, to your identity, agency, and authenticity and how you connect with students, to institutional and community context. So how are you supporting that in a larger context? But again, we won't talk too much about this because I want to get to hearing from you all. So let's pause. I see some stuff in the chat, so I want to read that out first. So I have not done anything to change the culture of unpaid internships. I teach students how to get an unpaid internship, but haven't worked directly with employers to help encourage paid experiences for hope work. Love having that language. I know having language is a big part of this. It is a bit outside the official scope of my role, but it is something that I know impacts our students and is exploitive, and I haven't done anything to change that exploitation. Yeah, that's a wonderful example of like, what systems am I complicit in? And I'm glad you named it's outside the realm of your role, because the other piece is the biggest thing that I've been really struggling and working on in my personal therapy right now is how do we do meaningful justice work while remembering the whole can't pour from an empty cup, boundaries kind of work. And how can I make more of this justice work part of my job description? How can I make sure I can do it within the boundaries of my work so I'm still protecting of myself? I don't have good answers to these questions, but I think what you just described, Ashley, is a perfect example of that. Because if you had time dedicated in your job, you would probably spend way more time with employers trying to advocate for paid internships. And at the same time, it makes sense in the systems that we live in that they don't allocate time in your schedule to do that. Is that something you could ask for? Do you have the capacity to? And that depends on your own workplace safety, your relationship with your managers, things like that. So that's a wonderful example. I also want to continue with the discussion because some of you already shared, but is anyone willing to share, what you're already doing to deconstruct these oppressive systems that you want to share as like a best practice? So let's pause and answer that first question. Yeah, Dawn.
Yeah, so thank you, Ashley, because I didn't even think about this, but my role is internships largely, and it is a challenge, right? Because there's certain fields, the service fields, where you got to pay your dues and you're not going to get a paid wage. And then there's others that don't want to pay a wage because they believe it implies an employment contract and they don't want a part of that, right? So one of the things that I've been doing that has been successful is, and I work for a community college, so when I advise new partners that, yes, if they're unpaid, we'll cover the workers' comp and things like that, and I let them know what the benefits are and how it can be easier for them. But what I've added is, and then if you'd like, you're happy with the student, at the conclusion, you can provide them with a stipend. Now, is a stipend a wage? No, but it's more than not getting a wage, right? And it's been amazing how many partners have been able to do that.
Thank you for sharing that, Dawn.
Position, at least.
Did I cut you off? I'm so sorry.
No.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a wonderful example. I love the acknowledgement of the complexity there too with the stipend of, is it a wage? No, we have to name that, but we also have to look at progress. I see Pete's hand up. I want to let Pete share, but I want to just do a quick plug for a book that I read that I think talks about these subjects really well. It's called Towards What Justice, and it's by editors Tuck and Yang, and it's a number of essays based on people who work in the education system. And it's based on that Martin Luther King quote, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And these essays are about, but towards what justice? What happens with when two social justice groups don't agree? And one of the things they talk about is this idea of like progress versus perfection, right? Do we say, no, I won't accept a stipend, I'll only accept a wage? And then do we lose partners because of that rigidness? Or do we give in? And it really talks about the nuances and complexities really beautifully. I'm doing probably a butcher job trying to describe it, but I think, Dawn, you gave a perfect example of the way that sometimes we have to accept a step forward and then keep pushing, right? And so the book just really kind of gives some more concrete examples of that. Let me also name, we have 2 minutes left just for people who are kind of on a time crunch, but I want to let Pete go ahead and share. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, I don't know if, well, I'll go as fast as I can. So you opened my eyes on a concept. I do some work, I do some volunteer work with a group of formerly incarcerated students at a local community college. And I hadn't really thought, although I lived it, I hadn't really thought about applying the concepts of are we creating a construct that is going to work for everybody, is going to work for each of these formerly incarcerated students at this community college? Is this going to work for all of them? Yeah, I think the honest answer to that question, especially after being here for a few moments, is no. It's not an honest portrayal of what education is going to do for them. Are they engaged in positive activity? Yes. Are they headed in what I believe to be a much better direction? Yes. But is this going to lead to meaningful work that is appropriately compensated? I have no idea. And that's an interesting thing for my mind, interesting space for my mind to be in right now. I meet with them on their check-ins every Wednesday or every Friday morning, and I don't know how I'm going to approach that. However, the other part of that is that there are opportunities. I'm fortunate enough to have opportunities to give resources. And so one of the things that we have set up with this program are stipends for students, and particularly stipends for student performance. And when I looked at the budget for the program, I thought to myself, okay, this is what I want to impact. And so I'm going to put money into directly into the pockets of these students. Now they're students, they're not employees, but um, that was in my mind a productive thing to do, a way to reach out. I also feel like, I forget who it was. I think it was Dawn who mentioned the complicit nature of what I do, and I absolutely feel complicit. And I often use this as an example, is that, do I really care about homelessness? Do I really care about homelessness? Do I really care about homelessness? Because if I did, I'd probably do more than I'm currently doing. Now, again, I do provide some funding for programs that help uh, those in need in a number of different ways, including homelessness. But are my boots on the ground? How much do I really care? Am I letting myself off the hook by writing a check? And so anyway, I just throw that out. There's a couple of examples. I could go long and deep on this one.
I hear that, and and I'm seeing movement in the chat as well. And I just want to name that, like, this is lifelong stuff, right? Whether we're in the first, second, or third half of our life, right? Or the seventh half of our life, as you so aptly named, Pete. This stuff is stuff that we're learning about as a society, we're learning about in community, we're learning on an individual level. And even when I hear you speak, there's so many layers of we already live in a capitalist system that really encourages a scarcity mindset and a sense of not enoughness, and we must be producing and we must be helping. And also, we don't want to let ourselves off the hook by writing a check or doing one thing or performative helpful things, right? Like there's literally, we could talk about these subjects for way more than 50 minutes. So first of all, thank you for everybody who shared. Thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability. And I want to make more spaces at these kind of conferences through CCDA for these kind of discussions, because I think we do have more best practices to share with each other. I think in community and talking about this stuff is where we can start to hold each other accountable and also give each other breaks, because we can't take it all on once, right? Pete could dedicate their whole life just to solving homelessness. And if they're doing it alone as one person, even in community with their workplace, they're not going to do it, right? So we have to, I hate to say it, I don't have any helpful answers
No,
other than that we're all
but
learning.
Shelby, you had an opportunity earlier, and the thought came back to my mind, and that is,
Please.
if any of us in this room are helping one person conquer one challenge, that day was worth it.
Exactly. And it's this, like, something I'm really getting focused on is how to hold contradictions. The contradictions of I am doing enough and I'm never going to do enough. Those things exist at the same time, and we are doing enough, obviously.
Another thought I thought of, Shelby,
Please go ahead.
is that this conversation and this type of conversation, when I'm in a space, a safe space where we can share, where we can be vulnerable and we can share, that was a good day too. And so you are absolutely right to do whatever you can to promote these spaces. That check-in with Rising Scholars on Friday morning is that space for me weekly. Weekly. I get 2 hours of that space weekly. That's really healthy for me right now. But this CCDA is another space that is safe for me. And then NCDA, I attended 2 of their town hall meetings recently. That was more safe space. And so the opportunities are out there, and we need to continue to look for those opportunities and expand those opportunities.
Yeah, and so I think on that note, I want to end us with, this session was not enough, and it was enough, right? It was a good day. It was a space to start. I hope we can stay in community through email, through LinkedIn, however we connect. And I also hope that these slides can be a resource where if you want to bring this to your team, right? If you want to bring this to your team and kind of highlight the data that if even just me putting together some of this data on income inequality, on new language like hope labor, if it helps you have these conversations and find those community members who want to work with you, if you want to pick one of these topics to talk about, if you want to talk about a specific population like formerly incarcerated folks, foster youth, homeless folks, there's so many ways we can do it. We can't do it all. The last thing I wanted to leave you with is just our social change ecosystem map, which is a great resource that literally kind of says what I just said of, we can't all be the disruptors. Some of us are experimenters, some of us are guides, some of us are storytellers. And so that goes back to this idea of doing it together. And I just really thank you all for sharing. I feel like the time flew by. I, as I say this, wish I spent less time talking and more time hearing, but I know the conversations will continue. So thank you all.
Shelby, I got to
Yeah.
tell you that I consider myself a data geek, and you have taken data to a whole nother level for me. All right. I'm a little,
I'm
a
glad.
little overwhelmed, but
Oh no.
I love it. I
You
love it.
humanized it too. So that's great. Oh yes, I know we are at 5 minutes. Thank you so much, Shelby, for this very informative, thought-provoking, introspective conversation that we had today, learning experience that we had today. I think we're all going to walk away with some questions for us to ponder over the weekend about how are we complicit, uncomfortable things that we are intentionally or unintentionally avoiding. So I thank everyone for being contributing to the space, learning, uplifting others as we, are having to revisit some things that are not always comfortable for us to talk about in spaces like this. But these are necessary conversations. So I'm going to end it and stop recording right now. But again, thank you, everyone. Complete the survey and